The sun burned hot over the small western town and the air was heavy with dust. People gathered near the old wooden platform in the center of town, their boots leaving marks in the dirt. Horses snorted and pulled at their reins as men tied them to posts, while women whispered among themselves, curious about what was about to happen. Children tried to peek through the crowd, their eyes wide with excitement and fear. It was not every day that such a gathering took place, and today the whole town seemed to be waiting for one event. On the platform stood an auctioneer, a tall man with a loud voice and a wide hat. Beside him was a woman, her hands bound loosely, her dark hair long and tangled. She was from the Apache people, proud and strong, though the dust on her face and the tiredness in her eyes told of the hardship she had endured. Even standing under the harsh sun, she kept her chin high. The crowd stared at her as if she were both dangerous and helpless at the same time. Whispers ran through the people like a wind. Some said she had been caught after a raid. Others claimed her tribe had left her behind. Many did not know the truth, but they did not care for truth as much as they cared for gossip. The auctioneer raised his hand, calling for silence. His voice carried across the crowd as he announced that the woman would be sold. He spoke as though he were selling a horse or a tool, not a human being, and this made some men laugh while others only nodded. The Apache woman did not move. She looked out over the faces watching her, her dark eyes full of fire. There was no fear there, only strength. But the people in the crowd did not see strength. They saw something else. They imagined what would happen to her once she was taken away, and their thoughts were not kind. The women whispered again, their voices sharp and full of judgment. The men spoke louder, their jokes rough and cruel. The auctioneer started the bidding. At first the numbers were small, men tossing coins as if it were a game. The Apache woman kept her eyes steady, her face like stone. But then, as the price began to rise, the laughter died down. More and more men stepped back, unwilling to risk their money. The bidding grew tense. Some thought it was foolish to spend so much, others said it would be worth it. Everyone wondered who would win. Then it happened. From the back of the crowd, a man's voice called out a number so high that silence fell over the entire square. People turned their heads to see who had spoken. A tall figure stepped forward, his coat dusty from travel, his hat pulled low over his face. He did not look like the others. He was calm, quiet, his eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. The auctioneer raised his eyebrows, surprised by the amount. But when no one else spoke, he slammed his hand down and declared the man the winner. A murmur ran through the crowd. The townsfolk leaned close to one another, whispering in disbelief. Why would anyone pay so much for her? Many assumed the worst. They thought the man must be cruel, that he wanted her for reasons too dark to be spoken aloud. Some even laughed nervously, shaking their heads. The women looked away, pity and fear on their faces. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, sensing the tension. The stranger walked up to the platform without a word. His boots struck the wooden boards with a slow, steady rhythm. He handed the auctioneer a small leather bag heavy with coins. The auctioneer weighed it in his hand and nodded, satisfied. The stranger then looked at the Apache woman. For a moment the two stood face to face, the crowd watching with hungry eyes. She stared at him, waiting to see what kind of man he was. But he did not speak, nor did he reach for her roughly as others might have done. He simply untied the rope that bound her hands and then motioned for her to follow him. Gasps rose from the people. Some muttered that he was bold, others that he was foolish. A few called out jokes, but the stranger ignored them. He turned, walked down from the platform, and began to lead her through the crowd. She followed, her steps slow, her face unreadable. The people parted to let them pass, their eyes fixed on the unusual pair. The murmurs grew louder as they walked away. Everyone thought they knew what would happen next. They believed the stranger had bought the woman for pain, that his cabin would become her prison. They shook their heads, certain of the dark future awaiting her. But none of them truly knew the man, and none of them guessed his reasons. As the two of them moved farther from town, the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of red and gold. The Apache woman walked silently, her mind racing. She had been ready for cruelty, ready for chains, ready for the worst. But the man beside her said nothing, did nothing to harm her. His silence was strange, almost unsettling. Who was he? Why had he paid so much? And what did he really want? The townspeople watched until they were gone, small figures against the endless stretch of desert. The whispers did not stop. In fact, they grew into full stories, tales twisted with fear and imagination. By nightfall, the town was alive with talk of the stranger and the Apache woman. Some said he was a merciless outlaw. Others claimed he had secrets no one dared speak of. A few even wondered if he had gone mad. But out in the quiet land beyond town, only the two of them knew the truth of the moment. She walked beside him, tired but still holding her head high. He walked ahead, his stride steady, his mind hidden like his eyes beneath the brim of his hat. Between them lay a silence heavy with questions, and the beginning of a story that no one in town could have imagined. The night would come soon, and with it, answers. But for now, all that remained was the memory of the highest bid, the shocked faces of the crowd, and the uncertain path that stretched before them both. The stranger had made his choice, and the Apache woman had been carried into a fate very different from what everyone believed. The story had only just begun. The sun was sinking lower as the stranger and the Apache woman left the noise of the town behind. The sound of horses, laughter, and gossip slowly faded until only the crunch of boots on dry earth and the call of distant birds filled the air. The land stretched wide, endless in every direction, painted with orange and gold light. The Apache woman walked carefully, her eyes always alert, her mind turning over questions she could not yet answer. She did not know where he was taking her or what his true purpose was. The man said nothing. He carried himself with calmness as if silence was his companion. His steps were steady, his back straight, and his hat still low, covering much of his face. He did not look at her often, but when he did, it was brief, as though to make sure she was keeping up. She matched his pace, her pride keeping her strong even though her body was weary from days of captivity. After some time, the lights of the town were only small specks far behind them. The Apache woman glanced back once, then turned her eyes forward again. She knew the people in that town believed she had been bought for cruelty. Their whispers had been heavy in the air, sharp as knives. She had seen the way they looked at her, like she was not a person but a prize for someone's darkest desires. Yet the stranger's silence confused her. He had not spoken a word to claim her or to threaten her. He had simply walked. When the first stars appeared in the sky, they reached a small cabin on the edge of the land. It stood near a cluster of trees, weathered but strong, with smoke gently rising from a chimney. A horse was tied to a post, lifting its head when it saw the man approach. The Apache woman's eyes studied the place. It was not the home of a cruel man who wished to show off wealth. It was plain, simple, and quiet. The stranger opened the door and motioned for her to step inside. She hesitated. Her instincts told her to be careful, yet she walked in, ready to face whatever waited. To her surprise, the cabin was clean. A fire burned in the hearth, giving warmth. There was a wooden table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, and shelves with jars of dried food. It was not a prison. It was a home. The man set down his hat, finally showing his face clearly in the firelight. He was older than she first thought, his features lined by years of hard living. His eyes were steady, not cruel, but tired, as if they carried weight from the past. He poured water into a cup and placed it on the table. Then, without a word, he slid it toward her. She did not touch it at first. Her mind warned her of tricks. But her throat was dry and her strength was low. Slowly, she lifted the cup and drank. The water was cool, pure, and refreshing. When she finished, he handed her a piece of bread. Again, she hesitated, then accepted it. The silence between them was heavy, but not with threat. It was the silence of 2 people who did not yet know how to speak to one another. She watched him closely, waiting for him to reveal his true reason. But he did not. He sat across from her, eating little himself, as though his thoughts were far away. That night, she slept lightly by the fire, ready to defend herself if needed. The man gave her a blanket but kept his distance, lying on the floor near the door. She listened to his breathing, steady and calm. It was strange. If he had bought her for harm, why had he not acted? The question burned in her mind as the flames of the fire slowly died down. The next morning, She awoke to the smell of food cooking. The man had prepared a simple meal, beans and bread. He placed a plate before her without asking. She looked at him, trying to read his face. Still, he said nothing. His actions, though, spoke in a way she could not ignore. He treated her as if she were a guest, not a prisoner. As the days passed, she began to notice more. He never locked the door. He never raised his hand or voice at her. When he worked outside repairing fences or feeding the animals, he did not chain her or order her to stay inside. She could have walked away into the open land, but her body was still weak and she did not know the exact path to return to her people. So she stayed, watching him, waiting for his truth to show. One evening, as the fire glowed warmly, she finally asked him in her own tongue, though softly, "Why?" He looked at her, not understanding her words but sensing her meaning. For the first time, he spoke more than a few words. His voice was low but firm. He said he had seen enough pain in his life. He could not watch the crowd treat her like an object. He bought her to stop them, not to claim her. His eyes carried a sadness she did not expect. Though she did not understand every word, his tone reached her. She could feel his sincerity. It puzzled her, even unsettled her. Men of his kind rarely showed kindness to her people, yet here he was, offering food, water, and freedom within walls that could have easily been her prison. She began to test him in small ways. She left the cabin to sit outside, waiting to see if he would stop her. He did not. She refused his food one night, expecting anger. Instead, he simply set it down and ate his own quietly. She asked for water while he was busy, thinking he might snap. He stood, filled her cup, and returned to his work. Each test revealed the same thing. His patience and calmness never broke. Still, trust did not come quickly. She slept with one eye open, ready to run if she sensed danger. But slowly, something inside her began to shift. She noticed the way he treated his horse, gentle and steady. She saw how carefully he handled tools, fixing things with care instead of force. She realized he lived alone, in silence, with only the wind and the land as his company. At night, when the fire flickered, she sometimes caught him staring into the flames, his eyes far away. He looked like a man carrying stories he never told, memories that weighed on him like stones. She wondered what those stories were, and why they made him different from the others she had seen. Back in town, the people spoke differently. Rumors grew wild. They said the stranger was keeping the Apache woman locked away. They said she was paying for the sins of her tribe. Some claimed they heard her cries at night, though none had gone near his cabin. Their words were sharp, but none of them knew the truth. The truth was this: the cabin was not filled with cruelty, but with silence, patience, and small acts of unexpected kindness. The stranger did not see her as the crowd did. He saw someone who deserved more than chains. She did not yet understand him fully, but she could no longer deny the difference, and so the days stretched on. Two people from worlds apart shared the same fire, the same food, and the same silence. The Apache woman still guarded her heart, but questions began to rise in her mind. Who was this man? What pain lived behind his quiet eyes? And why, of all people in that town, had he chosen to spend so much to protect her dignity? The answers had not yet come. But one thing was certain. The life she expected after the auction, the chains, the cruelty, the humiliation, had not happened. Instead, she had entered into a strange new chapter, one where nothing was as the crowd had believed. The path ahead was still unclear, but the shadow of fear was slowly being replaced by a fragile spark of curiosity. The days stretched into weeks, and the Apache woman began to notice more of the stranger's ways. He woke early each morning, often before the sun had climbed above the horizon. She would hear the steady rhythm of his boots on the wooden floor as he moved about, starting a fire, boiling water, or stepping outside to tend to his horse. He worked with his hands from dawn to dusk, and every task he performed carried patience, almost as though he was trying to keep his mind busy with endless chores. She remained cautious, but her eyes followed him. At first, it was out of suspicion. expecting him to show a cruel side. Yet over time she realized she was watching with curiosity. The man who had paid the highest bid for her was unlike the ones she had known before. He was not quick to anger, nor did he seek to control her. He lived a life of quiet, and it seemed that silence was not just his habit, it was his shield. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, he sat by the fire outside the cabin sharpening a tool. The Apache woman sat a short distance away, weaving strands of grass together with restless fingers. She had begun to feel restless with the silence between them. Finally, she spoke in broken English, her voice low but clear. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. The stranger paused, his hand stilling on the blade. He looked up, his eyes catching the last light of the sun. For a long time, he did not answer. The fire cracked softly, filling the silence. She thought he might ignore her. But then he set the tool aside and leaned forward slightly. His voice steady, but carrying a weight she could feel. "I bought you so no one else would," he said. The words were simple, but she felt their meaning sink into her chest. She frowned, unsure if she understood. "Why?" she asked again. His gaze drifted toward the horizon where the desert stretched wide and endless. "I have seen enough hurt," he said slowly. "I could not watch it happen again." "Not to you." The Apache woman's eyes narrowed as she studied him. She could hear the truth in his voice, though she did not yet understand the story behind it. His face carried lines of sorrow, as if his past was carved into his very skin. She sensed that he was not only speaking about her, but about something else, something that haunted him. That night she thought of his words while lying near the fire. Her people had taught her that actions revealed more than words. The stranger's actions had already shown much: his patience, his quiet respect, his refusal to treat her as a prisoner. Now his words added another layer. He had not bought her to own her. He had bought her to protect her. The thought unsettled her because it was so far from what she expected. The next day, curiosity pulled at her. As he worked outside repairing a broken fence post, she stepped closer. "You fought before?" she asked hesitantly. He looked at her, then nodded. "Yes," he said simply. She waited, but he did not continue. She realized that he was not a man who shared his stories easily. Yet she wanted to know. She wanted to understand why his eyes held such quiet sadness, why he carried himself as though he had seen too much. Little by little, she began to speak more. She told him about her people, about the rivers and mountains of her homeland, about the songs her mother used to sing. At first, he listened in silence, but slowly, he began to ask small questions. His voice was careful, as though he feared breaking something fragile. In return, he told her pieces of his own past. He had once been a soldier, riding with men who fought against her people. He had followed orders and in doing so, had seen villages burned and families torn apart. His voice grew heavy as he spoke of it, his eyes never lifting from the fire. "I thought I was serving honor," he said softly, "but I was only serving cruelty." The Apache woman listened, her chest tightening. His words carried shame, and she could feel that the memories weighed on him deeply. For the first time she saw him not only as a stranger, but as a man who carried scars inside him. She did not forgive him instantly. Her own people had suffered too much. But she recognized that his guilt was real. Days turned into nights, and the space between them slowly shifted. She no longer watched him with suspicion, but with quiet interest. He began teaching her simple words in his language, pointing to objects and naming them. She in turn taught him words from her own tongue, correcting him when he mispronounced them. Their lessons were clumsy at times, but laughter began to replace silence, soft and surprising. One afternoon, as they worked side by side gathering wood, she caught herself smiling at his attempts to repeat her language. His serious face grew even more serious when he stumbled over a word, and she could not help but laugh. He glanced at her with a raised brow, then shook his head and laughed as well, a sound she had not heard from him before. It was rough but genuine, like a stone rolling free after being trapped too long. The bond between them grew in small, quiet moments. She began to trust that he would not harm her. He began to see her not as a shadow of his guilt, but as a person with her own strength and voice. The town, however, still whispered. People said he had locked her away. They said she was suffering in silence. None of them had seen her walking freely outside his cabin, or sitting beside him by the fire, or teaching him words that once belonged only to her people. One evening, when the stars stretched wide across the sky, she looked at him and asked, "Do you regret buying me?" He turned his gaze to her, his eyes steady. "No," he said simply. "I regret many things in my life, but not that." Her chest tightened again, but this time with a feeling she did not expect. For so long she had believed that men like him only saw her people as enemies or prizes. But here he was, speaking with honesty that touched something deep inside her. She looked away, unsure of how to answer, but the warmth of the fire seemed different that night. As the days passed, the walls she had built around her heart began to soften. She did not trust easily, but she could no longer deny that this man was not like the others. He had carried her away from a crowd that saw her as less than human. He had given her water, food, and freedom within his home. He had shared his guilt and shame without expecting forgiveness. The Apache woman realized she was beginning to see him differently. He was no longer just the stranger who had paid the highest bid. He was becoming a man she wanted to understand, perhaps even trust. And as the desert winds whispered through the trees and the stars shone above them, she sensed that their story was only beginning. What had started as an auction filled with whispers of cruelty was slowly turning into something no one in that town could have imagined. A bond between two worlds, built not on chains but on fragile growing trust. The weeks passed slowly, yet each day carried small changes that neither of them could ignore. The Apache woman began to move around the cabin with ease, no longer watching the door as though it were a trap. She stepped outside in the mornings to breathe the fresh air, her feet brushing against the dry earth as she looked across the open land. The stranger never stopped her, never gave orders. He let her be, as though freedom was something she was meant to carry again. One morning she walked down to the stream near the cabin. The water sparkled in the early light, and the sound of it rushing over the rocks reminded her of her homeland. She knelt by the edge, dipping her hands into the cool water. For a moment, memories of her people flooded back. Children laughing, elders telling stories, songs rising into the night sky. Her chest tightened with longing, but when she turned her head, she saw him standing a few steps away, his horse grazing behind him. He was watching her, not with suspicion, but with quiet care. She realized then that he had followed not to control her, but to keep her safe. Their days took on a rhythm. He worked on the land, mending fences, chopping wood, and tending to his horse. She began to help in small ways, gathering kindling, grinding corn, or weaving baskets from grass she collected. At first, she did these things for herself, to keep her hands busy. But over time, she noticed how he looked at her work with quiet respect. It was as if he saw her strength in every task she completed. The silence between them started to break more often. She spoke to him in short phrases, testing her English. He listened patiently, answering in simple words so she could learn. In return, she taught him more of her own language. His tongue stumbled over the sounds, but he never gave up. Sometimes his mistakes made her laugh, a sound she had thought she had lost forever. The first time she laughed openly in front of him, he paused in his work and smiled faintly, as if hearing it was worth more than all the coins he had once given at the auction. As trust grew between them, so did the way they faced the outside world. One day, he told her they needed to go to town for supplies. She stiffened at the thought of walking through the streets again, of facing the eyes of those who had once stared at her with cruel amusement. But he assured her with calm certainty. "You walk beside me," he said softly. "No one will harm you." When they arrived in town, the air was thick with whispers. People froze when they saw her, expecting her to trail behind him in chains. But instead, she walked freely at his side, her head held high. The murmur of voices rose like a wave. Men frowned, women gasped, and children pointed, unable to understand what they were seeing. At the general store, the sheriff himself appeared, his hand resting on the handle of his gun. He eyed the Apache woman carefully, then looked at the stranger. "What's this?" the sheriff asked, suspicion heavy in his tone. "She walking free now?" The stranger's eyes hardened, though his voice stayed calm. "She's under my protection," he said firmly. "Bought her fair, didn't I?" "No law broken here." The sheriff's jaw tightened. Around them, the townsfolk leaned closer, waiting for a fight. But the stranger's steady voice and unshaken stance silenced the tension. After a long moment, the sheriff muttered under his breath and turned away. The crowd, left without a show, began to scatter, yet the whispers followed them wherever they went. Inside the store, the Apache woman stood beside him, her eyes moving across shelves of flour, beans, and tools. She noticed how the storekeeper avoided looking at her directly, speaking only to the stranger. But she also noticed how the stranger never ignored her presence. When he asked what they needed, he glanced at her, waiting for her nod or shake of the head. It was a small act, but it gave her dignity in a place that wished to take it away. Walking back to the cabin, she felt the weight of many eyes still on her. But she also felt something else, pride. She had not hidden. She had walked freely, and the stranger had stood firmly at her side. For the first time since her capture, she felt a piece of her spirit return. That evening, as they sat by the fire, she turned to him. "Why risk trouble?" she asked. "Town does not like me." He stirred the fire with a stick, his face lit by the glow. "They don't need to like you," he said quietly. "They just need to know you are not alone." His words stayed with her. She thought of how he had faced the sheriff, how he had spoken without fear. He was not only protecting her from cruelty within his cabin, he was protecting her from the judgment of the entire town. The following days brought even more change. She began to sing softly while she worked. Old songs her mother had taught her, the melodies floated through the cabin, mixing with the crackle of fire and the sound of wind outside. The stranger listened quietly, sometimes closing his eyes as if the songs healed something deep within him. One night, she asked him directly, "You carry sorrow." "Why?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because I was part of things I cannot undo," he said slowly. "I saw good people fall. I followed orders I should have refused. I carry their faces with me still." His honesty struck her. He did not hide his past, nor did he excuse it. He admitted his guilt openly, like a man who no longer wished to run from it. For the first time, she felt her anger toward men of his kind soften slightly. Perhaps not all were blind to their wrongs. Perhaps some, like him, carried regret deep enough to seek a different path. Her trust grew, though carefully. She still longed for her people, for her homeland, but she began to see the cabin not as a place of captivity, but as a place where something new could be built. Understanding, maybe even friendship. The town continued to gossip. Some said the stranger had gone mad, keeping the Apache woman as his equal. Others whispered that she had bewitched him with strange charms. But none of them knew the truth. None of them saw how she and the stranger worked side by side, how they shared food, words, and moments of quiet laughter. One afternoon, while gathering berries near the woods, she looked back at the cabin. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and she saw him outside mending a broken fence post. For the first time she thought of the cabin not as his home, but as their home. The thought startled her, yet it felt right. The path they walked was still uncertain. She did not know if she would remain with him forever or return to her people when the time came. But she knew one truth with certainty. He had not bought her for cruelty, as the town believed. He had bought her to save her from a life of humiliation and chains. And in doing so, he had given her something no one else had offered since her capture: respect. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in gold and purple, she sat beside him by the fire. Neither spoke for a long while. They did not need to. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge, one slowly built between two souls who had once stood on opposite sides of the world. The seasons began to turn. What had once been dry, hot winds slowly shifted into cooler air. The Apache woman felt the changes in the land, just as she felt the changes inside her heart. She was no longer the captive that the town had whispered about. She was a woman who had found unexpected dignity, standing freely beside a man who had once been only a stranger, but now carried a place in her life. One morning, she woke to the sound of him chopping wood outside. The steady thud of the axe echoed in the crisp air. She stepped outside and watched him. His shoulders were broad, his movements firm, but his face showed the weight of a man who worked not just with his body but with his spirit. He looked up and saw her watching. Instead of turning away, he gave a small nod. It was simple, but in that nod she felt something, an unspoken acknowledgement that she was part of his life now, not an outsider. The whispers from the town had not stopped. Whenever they went for supplies, eyes followed them. People still did not understand. They assumed he was strange, that she was trapped, or that something unnatural bound them together. But those whispers no longer pierced her spirit the way they once had. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. The truth was not in their gossip, but in the small, quiet moments she lived each day. Moments of shared bread, lessons in each other's language, and the comfort of silence that no longer carried fear. One evening, as the fire warmed the cabin, she asked him softly, "What do you see me as?" Her voice carried years of pain, the weight of having been treated as less by many before. She braced herself for his answer. He did not look away. His eyes were steady, lit by the flames. "I see you as strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than anyone I have ever known." Her heart tightened. She turned her head to hide the shine in her eyes. For so long she had carried herself with pride, but deep inside she had felt broken. His words, spoken without hesitation, touched something she thought had been lost. For the first time in a long while, she believed that perhaps she was more than just what the world tried to make of her. In the weeks that followed, she began to teach him more of her culture. She showed him how to braid rope from plant fibers, how to track animals by the smallest marks in the dirt, and how to listen to the wind as it carried signs of weather. He learned carefully with respect, as though every word from her was precious knowledge. In return, he taught her how to work the land with new tools, how to mend clothing, and how to read a few simple words from a worn book he kept on the shelf. These exchanges became more than lessons. They became threads weaving their lives together. She no longer saw him only as a man of sorrow. She saw him as someone who had chosen to walk a different path, one of quiet redemption. Then came the day she decided to visit her people. She told him her heart longed to see them, to let them know she was alive. His face grew still at her words, but he did not stop her. Instead, he saddled his horse, prepared supplies, and walked beside her as she set out. The journey was long, but she moved with strength. When they finally reached the edge of her people's land, her chest swelled with emotion. From the trees emerged faces she knew, family, kin, elders who had thought she was lost. They cried out in shock and joy, rushing to greet her. She embraced them fiercely, tears running freely. The stranger stood at a distance, silent, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He did not intrude. He did not try to claim a place among them. He only waited, his eyes soft as he watched her reunite with her people. Later, when she introduced him, her kin looked at him with suspicion. Their eyes narrowed, remembering the cruelty of men like him. She stood tall and told them, "He bought me, but not for chains. He bought me to free me." Her words carried weight, and though her kin did not fully trust him, they respected her truth. For several days she stayed with her people, listening to stories, singing old songs, and feeling the warmth of belonging. Yet she could not ignore the pull in her heart toward the cabin where the stranger waited. He had become part of her story, too, and she realized that her life had changed in ways she had not expected. When she returned to him, he did not ask her to explain why she had come back. He only nodded, his face quiet but relieved. They continued their life together, no longer just a man and a woman bound by circumstance, but two souls who had chosen, in their own way, to walk side by side. The town eventually grew used to seeing them. Though the whispers never completely stopped, people began to notice the truth. They saw her walking freely, trading fairly, her chin held high. They saw his steady presence beside her, never once treating her as anything less than equal. The cruel stories lost their strength, replaced by quiet respect that no one dared admit aloud. As time passed, she carried herself with the same pride she had always held, but now it was mixed with peace. She knew she had survived humiliation and fear. She had found dignity in a place where she least expected it, and she had found, in one man's choice, proof that even in a world filled with cruelty, there could still be compassion. Years later, when the story of the auction was told again in the town, it was not whispered with cruel laughter. Instead, people spoke with wonder. They told of the day a stranger made the highest bid for an Apache woman. Everyone thought he was buying her for torment. But they learned in time that he had paid not to own her but to save her. His highest bid had not been for possession, but for protection, for dignity, and for a chance to give back a little of what had been taken from her. The Apache woman carried that truth with her always. She had not chosen the path that brought her to him, but she had chosen to stay, to walk beside him, and to build something out of two broken worlds. Together, they had created a story that silenced even the cruelest whispers. And so, the tale ended not with chains, but with freedom. Not with cruelty, but with respect. A man once weighed down by guilt and a woman once marked by humiliation had found in each other the chance to heal. And in their quiet lives, Far from the noise of the town, they proved that sometimes the highest price is paid not for pain, but for love, dignity, and the chance to do what is right.